we're just right on the start time. So let me say hello. My name is Martin Boyd. I'm VP Product Marketing here at Profisee, and co-presenting, or really not presenting so much as co-discussing today, is my colleague Malcolm Hawker. Do you want to say hi, Malcolm?
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody. It's nice to be here today talking about how data can enable your supply chain challenges. Thanks, Martin, for the intro.
Excellent. All right, so we have a good number of folks in the audience here today, but not so many that we can't be interactive. Malcolm and I are certainly planning to be interactive. We do have some PowerPoint here, but it's really just to guide the discussion. We're not planning on death by PowerPoint for you guys. It'll be more death by discussion. So hopefully that will work. So anyway, there should be ample opportunity for you to ask questions. And you can drop questions either in the chat or Q&A. Since there's two of us here today, we ought to be able to monitor and respond to questions as we go through, or if not, we'll wrap them, catch them at the end, or if we run out of time, then we'll reach out to you afterwards. So feel free to drop anything you'd like into the conversation. So I'm going to share my screen momentarily here. Oh, let me just put that in.
While Martin gets that squared away. As a side job, I host a podcast called the CDO Matters podcast. I'm in the middle of building out my studio, including my neon sign. Hopefully it's not too much of a distraction today. I didn't order enough of the sound dampening panels, so that's you see the kind of the space there. But anyway, I would invite anybody to check out CDO Matters if they're looking for more information on how to become a truly data-driven organization.
Yes, I was going to plug that at the end of the webcast here. It's certainly something that anyone can benefit from, either talking about manufacturing topics or any other topics to do with master data management or data in general. Indeed. So we are the two hosts here today. As I said, I'm going to run through just a little bit of PowerPoint to give you some context, and then we'll just have a couple of slides just to guide the conversation as we get into it. But what we're going to talk to here about is how to take control of your supply chain with trusted data. So supply chain, not just upstream, but also really the demand chain and also a little bit of the internals, but we'll talk about all of that. And we'll start with, these are the topics that we're going to kind of dig into: more resilient supply chains, more agile operations, new ways of engaging customers, which frankly, I think we see mostly in our manufacturing customer base, manufacturers who are looking to get a better understanding of their downstream demand chain to engage customers in a new way. And that kind of leads to enhancing the customer experience. So we're gonna dig into all of that. But I'm going to start just by setting the scene. As I said, not death by PowerPoint here, but just something to get us all on the same page, and make sure that we're thinking about this the same way and thinking about the scope of what MDM can do in the context to any organization. And we'll start with a quote from Gartner. And Malcolm, you might want to read this because I believe this is originally yours.
Yeah. So a little bit about my background, in case you didn't know. I joined Profisee earlier this summer as their head of data strategy. And previous to that, for nearly 3 years, I was a data and analytics analyst at Gartner, covering governance, data strategy, MDM. And in our last MDM Magic Quadrant document, this is something that we wrote to kind of represent the state of the nation, as it were, with MDM. So what we've seen over the last few years is that MDM has progressed from this kind of nice to have, we'll get to it when we get to it, not that important. Yes, we struggle with it, but it's kind of page 3 or 4 of the requirements document to page 1 of the requirements document. MDM has become foundational now to digital transformation programs, and so many companies are focused on digital transformation. When we think about digital transformation, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of companies. We were looking at, when we were at Gartner, we looked across about 12 different kind of high-level initiatives that range from things like customer experience to supply chain optimization, launching e-commerce channels, even kind of work from home type initiatives that were tied into COVID. So there were a lot of things that kind of get wrapped into digital transformation. But for the sake of this conversation, a lot of the supply chain optimization initiatives and a lot of the direct-to-consumer initiatives that manufacturers were embarking on were tied into digital transformation. Digital transformation was kind of the catch-all that was appearing in the board presentations, that was appearing in a lot of the financial statements for companies. And these components were making up these digital transformation programs. And as a part of that, companies were increasingly more and more focused on MDM, because they rightfully acknowledged that if our supplier data is bad, or if our customer data is bad, or if our materials data is bad, how in the world are we going to digitally transform? How are we going to digitally accelerate? How are we going to do all of these initiatives if the gasoline in our engine, meaning the data that we're using to do all this, is bad? So yes, MDM has progressed now to much more of a foundational component than ever before.
Excellent. Yes. So an excellent overview there, and also a convenient way of introducing Malcolm's. Talk about since we're talking about digital transformation, and it means different things to different people. It really, I think, the broad description is using data to drive your business in an innovative way, whatever that means to you. So here's some folks that have done that in customers of Profisee in the manufacturing space. This is not a completely up-to-date slide. There are other customers that aren't listed on here, but it serves our purpose in terms of just giving an idea of the breadth of folks that we see. It's a pretty big segment of our customer base. And then let's just look really quickly at some of the things folks are doing to use data or manage data better so that they can drive their business. So AB InBev, drinks and brewing company, is using Profisee to consolidate. They wanted to consolidate brewing operations, make sure that they had good consistency around the world. And so there's workflow for recipe management. I mean, things like, depending on the altitude of the brewery, the things have to vary a little bit in the alchemy of what they do. So they're using Profisee to manage and track a lot of that information, so that they have a single central place where the data they know is reliable, and they can use it to drive their business. Someone like Constellation Brands International. Oh, I just picked on another beer company. I wonder why. Beer, wine, and spirits. They had a very different and have a very different use case, where they had gone through an amount of M&A, mergers and acquisitions. They had multiple ERP systems. I think this is going to be a common thread of a lot of what we talk about here today. And they wanted to consolidate all the customer information from those multiple ERP systems from the legacy acquisitions, so that they could identify customers, consolidate their orders, and reduce shipping costs. And that was a pretty big return on investment from them, just based on simple, I say simple, the relatively simple idea of consolidating the customers so that they can manage the logistics around them better. And then someone like Osser, who's an orthopedics equipment manufacturer in Reykjavik, I believe, and they wanted to drive data quality across 10 ERP instances, including Microsoft Dynamics, to reduce shipping costs, improve enterprise visibility. So some of these things are upstream, where they're trying to consolidate supply chain information, maybe do strategic procurement. Some of them are internal operations, and some of them are downstream. And we'll talk more about some of that as we get farther into it. But suffice it to say, we have quite a lot of customers in the manufacturing space doing a very broad variety of things. TTX, I notice here, I don't have it written up on the other side here, but TTX manages a lot of rolling stock, a lot of rail cars, and so they're using it to manage logistics and operations. I won't go into a lot more, but there's a broad variety of use cases represented on this page here that we'll get into as we get into it a little farther. So the consistent themes, though, that we see, and Malcolm, I'll let you speak a little to this after I've introduced it, but the consistent themes that we see in manufacturing amongst the people who are buying MDM and particularly buying Profisee is the number one, ERP sprawl. There's a lot of ERPs in the organization. probably because of M&A, could be because of other legacy historical reasons where, different plants, different regions, different brands or product lines are managed differently. So they've ended up with different ERP systems, or, there could be different, JD Edwards being used over here and Microsoft Dynamics being used over there, or it could be just multiple instances, or in fact, it could be SAP, which is the more dominant ERP in manufacturing. But there's many ERP systems. They've not all been set up the same way. They don't have the same reference data. They don't have all the same governance standards or data quality standards. So when you try and pull all that information together in one place, you can find that it's inconsistent and just difficult to use, hard to get any real insights from. If you've got the same customer entered in 3 different systems, but it looks a little bit different, when you pull all the data together, it looks like 3 customers instead of 1 customer. Everything else after that's going to be a little bit difficult. So the need for high quality trusted data is there in order to drive digital transformation, whatever that means to you, whether it's BI analytics, which could include machine learning. It could be AI for demand patterns or supply requirement patterns or whatsoever. Could be to drive operational efficiency. It could also be for compliance, either with consumer requirements for GDPR, CCPA, that kind of right to be forgotten type stuff, or other forms of compliance in the business. And if you get all of this, the data right, then you should be able to do, you're at the starting point to be able to do things like build more resilient supply chains, more agile operations, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to talk a little bit about the idea of multiple ERPs from your Gartner perspective and what people were asking you about back in the day?
Yeah, happy to share. And back in the day was earlier this year.
Yes,
so
I know you're not that old.
Yeah, it's not like 20 years ago. It was in March and April of this year before I made the jump over to Profisee. But yeah, ERP sprawl is the easy one. That one's the kind of the low hanging fruit, right? So what I saw often, and my estimate was, of the 1,500 conversations, and that's a real number, the 1,500 conversations I had with senior leaders at companies, a good 20% of them were focused on supply chain related challenges, whether that was direct or indirect. Most of the time it was direct spends, but often it was indirect as well. And what I heard a lot of was senior leaders. Sometimes it was chief procurement officers. Sometimes it was VPs of manufacturing. Sometimes it was people on the data side of the house as well. So it kind of traversed both sides of the house. What I often heard was, our plant operations, we're pretty good. We're okay with being relatively decentralized from a plant operation perspective, because that's kind of how we work. And maybe we even have kind of regional models where country A and country B and country C are all operating independently. But I would be talking to people at headquarters branches of these organizations, or in more cross-functional roles within these organizations, that said, hey, we really, really need to find a way to centralize some of these business processes, particularly related to supplier and material management, right? Where the procurement of goods needs to be done in a little bit more of a centralized way than it is today. Today, we're highly decentralized. It's the Wild West. People can go buy whatever they want to buy. And we need to change that for very obvious reasons, right? Whether that is to optimize pricing with our suppliers, whether it's to reduce risk from a supply chain diversity perspective. We saw a lot of things happen over the last couple of years with just the resilience of the supply chain. So a lot of reaction to that was to companies to say, hey, maybe we need a little more centralization here around the stuff that we buy and who we buy it from. Then they would call me at Gartner, and we'd get into these conversations. Almost always, a lot of these senior leaders would say, okay, we've got a lot of ERPs, and the way to fix this is to consolidate ERPs. And hard to argue that, but ERP consolidations take a long time. They're, as many of you know on this, they're highly, highly disruptive, expensive, taking years and years and years, and probably never finish. So a lot of the conversations I was having was, hey, can you find a way as a phase one of this to look at this through the lens of data and instead of systems consolidation? Can you do a data consolidation? Can you use a tool like MDM and Profisee to create a 360 of a supplier or a material or an asset as a starting point, so you could understand exactly how bad the situation is? And maybe you don't need to just dive headfirst into this ERP consolidation effort where you're going to pay a lot of money to a lot of different consultants. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be really disruptive to business. But can you instead maybe look at this from more of a data perspective, whereas a step one, you do a supplier 360. So you know where is your supplier appearing across all of these different divisions or plants, and that was kind of almost always step one. A lot of other themes here. Martin mentioned some of them. Sometimes they were compliance driven, AML, KYC from a perspective of a supplier. Sometimes they were digital transformation. Sometimes they were around direct to consumer initiatives. But the key, the thing that I heard over and over and over again was ERP sprawl for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a theme we'll come back to again as we talk through some of the more specific use cases, and in particular moving to the cloud and parallel running of multiple ERP systems and stuff like that. So for now, that's kind of, and I think enough of an overview of what we see here. I've just got really one slide here I'm going to talk about just to cement in place. I'm not really sure if everybody on the call knows what MDM is and what kind of things it can tackle. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I want to just set the stage on this, and then we'll get deeper into the other topics. So if you're trying to drive what we just talked about, digital transformation, business insights, operational efficiency, whatever that looks like for you, whatever assembly of data that you're going to pull together in order to better drive your business, you want high quality, trusted data that's ready to use, that should be complete and consistent and accurate. And that seems like kind of a no-brainer type of a statement. Of course, that's what you'd want. Why would you not? But we just talked about ERP sprawl, and there are many different data silos that may contain pieces of the information you need. And so these silos on my picture here could be multiple ERPs. They could be different instances of SAP. They could be CRMs. They can be legacy apps. And you can have regional-based iterations of those, or product line-based iterations, or there can be a lot of complexity there, as we were just talking about. Could be external data feeds, etc. Some things that are somewhat under your control in terms of how the data gets entered and standardized and all, but somewhere it's not under your control at all because it's legacy, and some of these customers have been around for a long time, or it's an external data feed or whatsoever. So you have all of this siloed information that, because it was never created under a unified data governance program or data quality program, will be inconsistent and incomplete. And that's just a fact of life. If you didn't have that, you would be very, very unusual. So paradoxically, whoops, went too far. Paradoxically, the data that you have forms a brick wall or a barrier that prevents you from using the data itself to drive your business. So that's kind of the problem a lot of manufacturers face, and that's where MDM fits in. Profisee in particular here is able to take what we call master data from each one of these silos. So let's say we find all the places, we catalog all the places where customer data exists, or product data, or location, or asset, or supplier, or MRO supplies, or whatever it is that you need to drive your business. You can find all the places where that exists, extract it out, and enforce data standards on it so that you have a complete, consistent, reliable basis to build on. And that will include matching and merging the customer or product or whatever it is information from each one of these silos, validating that it hits your data quality and data governance requirements, that it's complete, and it conforms to all of the standard. There must be a status that is off this pick list. There must be an address that is valid to these standards, or whatever it is. And where the validation fails, then you need to remediate it. And sometimes that can be just through some kind of algorithm or enriching the data in some way by referring to an external system. Sometimes, most often, it involves a human being getting involved if the data is sufficiently important that it merits it. And so you have a data steward coming in and fixing the data in whatever way they need to fix it. And so now, once the data meets the standards, we can sync it all over the place. We can load it to our single golden master to drive the business. And since we just spent all that effort putting together a golden master, we now have more high quality data. Quite often we will feed it back into, or you specifically, the manufacturer would feed it back into some of these source systems to help drive operational efficiency. So we're doing all of this, MDM is doing all of this in order to overcome the data silos and create a trusted data foundation that can be used to drive the business. So that's really where MDM fits. That's what master data management is all about. Hopefully on a single little slide here, we've kind of set out the broad business problem, the requirement, and some of the capabilities that MDM can bring to the table to resolve them. And I'm not going to get any farther detail into that. Anything to add to that, Malcolm, before we go to the specific use cases?
No, Andrea had a question through the chat asking kind of where does Purview fit in all of this, and it's a great question. So one thing to keep in mind about MDM solutions is we're talking about a significant subset of data here. When we're talking about suppliers or customers or assets or materials, we're talking about data that is widely shared across the organization that needs specific business rules and specific governance policies applied to it that make it unique, that make it special. So when we're talking about like supplier records or customer records, I've worked with ridiculously large companies in the past where their supplier master is like 12 fields of data, right? We're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of fields of data here. We're talking about a significant subset where that data needs consistent quality, consistent structure, consistent governance policies so that it can be used widely in a more cross-functional way. Purview is a cataloging tool that will catalog everything, right? It will tell you where everything is in your organization and allow you to build glossaries for all data. MDM is a significant subset of data that needs specific rules, specific governance policies applied to it. So typically you'll see them sit kind of right next to each other, for lack of a better phrase, within an overall architecture where MDM can consume some insights from a catalog and provide insights back to a catalog about what is and what isn't master or vice versa. So there is an integration between Profisee and Purview for sharing of that level of information. But these systems support two very different use cases and are typically sitting right next to each other in a data ecosystem.
Yeah, and so specifically on this chart, we have two versions of this chart. One that shows Purview and one that doesn't. For simplicity today, I didn't include Purview. And for anybody who isn't familiar, Purview is Microsoft's data governance product. And so it would fit right above Profisee here. And what it would do specifically is catalog all of the data sources. So it automates that piece of it. It can automatically flag what if there's any sensitive data like HIPAA information or personally identifying information like social security numbers whatsoever, or geolocation tags or anything that might be sensitive for whatever reason. And then that catalog is something that Profisee can use. So instead of you having to go do the research by hand, so to speak, to go figure out where all the data is coming from, you can use Purview for that. And similarly, as Malcolm was talking about, data glossaries, data dictionaries, and data requirements can be specified in Purview and then inherited into Profisee. So we talk about them being better together. Each product has an independent value prop and can live very happily independently of the other. But if you have them both together, they reinforce each other. Purview is good at cataloging and setting up the rules. It doesn't do any enforcement of the rules. We do all the enforcement of the rules, but if we're in the same environment as Purview, we can use the rules that Purview gave us. So that's why we talk about that.
So Ben just asked the question in the chat as well, which I think is kind of appropriate when talking about an architecture as well. He asks, he suggests, says the proper use of Profisee is to harmonize data from different systems. Yes, completely agree with that. It's a data harmonizing tool or match merge tool, if you want to say that. It does a lot more. MDM systems do an awful lot more than that. But yes, it's to harmonize data. The way completely is create data in Profisee and then publish it out to the rest of these systems, which means no data is created in Profisee. Well, that depends. There's really kind of what we call two different styles of MDM. One is an analytical style of MDM. That would be a style where there is no data created in an MDM hub. All it's trying to do is to link things together that should be linked and matched together. Acme Incorporated, Acme and Sons, and MDM would look at that, apply some AI-driven algorithms to understand, is this one thing or is this three things? And it can link them together for a 360 view of something, for an analytical use case. In that case, there's no data being created in an MDM hub. I would argue you would still probably want to create some sort of master ID that linked those child IDs together. So technically, I think there would be some data created there. But for the most part, in an analytical style of MDM, you're not creating necessarily new records, because the source remains the system of record for those records. However, there is another style of MDM. It's called operational MDM, where if you wanted to, you could take Acme Inc., Acme Co., and physically merge them together, and to create a brand new master record that sits and is persisted in the hub and is subsequently pushed back down into operating systems. So that's what we call an operational style of MDM. It's a little bit more of a traditional kind of system of record, single version of the truth type approach to MDMs. It is still a very, very valid approach to MDM. It's how all reference data is largely managed, a single version of the truth where that data is being pushed into consuming systems. So you can create data in an MDM, or you can simply use it as a means to link existing source records together. Either approach can be valid depending on your use case.
Yeah, and there's as Malcolm knows better than any of us here, the Gartner published 4 different quote styles of MDM implementation, where you can completely lock down everything so that only the MDM system can create new records, or where you're more flexible, where new records can be created in the source system and then consolidated in the MDM system. It depends on your use case. Exactly. And in particular, reference data is something that you might completely centrally control and then just have everyone else to subscribe to it. So all of these different implementation styles are possible. As a practical matter, I think the reason it's not really discussed quite so much as it used to be is because most implementations are in fact a hybrid these days, is what we found.
Totally agree. Reference data is a classic example, right? Yeah. Like that is a kind of a hub and spoke type implementation that can exist right next to an analytical style. Just wanted to address Andrea's follow-up question. Even for analytical purpose, wouldn't you still want to create a golden record in the MDM? Yes. Most do, even if it's just a stub, like even if it's never really even used. I did. So when I deployed an MDM the first time, it was an analytical style of MDM. And my architect said, well, we don't need to create a master record because that's going to sit and persist in the source systems. And I said, well, let's create one anyway, because we may need it one day. If we ever want to go more operational, we'll have the flexibility to do that. Storage is relatively cheap here. You're talking about a dozen fields. It's not a lot of data. Typically, even in an analytical style, you're still creating a master record that's persisted in the MDM. Andrea, you're right.
All right, let's plow on, because this was only supposed to be the introduction.
Oh, sorry. Well, we got some good questions.
So yeah, no, it's good conversation. I'm enjoying it, by the way. So keep it coming. All right, so let's get into these topics: more resilient supply chains, agile operations, and engaging customers in new ways, which are the broadly the upstream operations and then downstream kind of ideas. So. Malcolm, do you want to talk a little bit about resilient supply chains? I know it's something that was a big topic for you at Gartner. Lots of people concerned about it. I think it's a concern that's only become more amplified recently with all the things in the news about supply chains. So why don't you just talk a little bit about all of that and where MDM fits from your perspective?
Yeah. It's a great question, and this one slide could take up our remaining 32 minutes. Indeed. And for somebody like me, who you would think gets paid by the word, could be a little bit of a challenge. But for so many of my ex-clients at Gartner, it really started with knowing your supplier, right? There's a lot of downstream things here. We could talk about logistics. We could talk about the manufacturing processes itself and IT, OT convergence. There's a whole other bunch of topics here, but the big one really was knowing your supplier and starting there, right? How many suppliers do we truly have? If we're a diversified organization with multiple operating units and we're buying goods, direct materials from Acme and Acme Inc., is that one thing or is that two things? And I know that sounds like a simple example, but that's a real challenge for a lot of large organizations. And just knowing what their true footprint was with a given supplier. And then that was kind of the top layer of the onion. And then the next layer of the onion was knowing kind of the supplier relationships and how they relate across your organization, or relationships that even exist within that existing supplier. For example, understanding kind of parent-child relationships that may exist within kind of complex organizational structures of your suppliers themselves, right? So a lot of my ex-clients were thinking, okay, supplier one, supplier two, supplier three, they're all independent suppliers, and we're fully diverse across this key material or this key ingredient. We don't have to worry about it if this one supplier goes under or goes bankrupt, or their goods get caught in a boat in the Suez Canal. We're okay. We'll still be able to meet our customer needs. Well, often what would happen is once you implement more kind of robust hierarchies to understand who those suppliers are, you would find that those three suppliers who you thought were independent operating units all actually were part of some broader corporate conglomerate that you didn't necessarily know existed. So not only was it managing kind of hierarchies and managing data about what you know about the suppliers, it would be also these complex supplier relationships to understand whether they were diverse or not, or understanding even things like optimizing supplier onboarding processes and like kind of KYC and all sorts of regulatory concerns about operations and beneficial ownership of these suppliers. So almost always the first question for driving more resilient supply chains obviously started with the supplier, and really kind of finding new ways to build a deeper and more robust knowledge of who you were doing business with, who you were buying stuff from. That was almost always the key use case here. Probably separate offline conversations, we could get into some of the other issues here related to kind of more downstream processes, but understanding the supplier is key.
Exactly. To reduce the risk of a supply chain disruption and to find an alternate supplier quickly, but also to negotiate the best buying price by aggregating your demand together.
Yep.
At one point in my life, I was with Ariba, and that was kind of the whole thing. There was aggregating supply chain enabling strategic procurement by aggregating demand signals and all of that kind of stuff. So a pretty broad and far-reaching topic. So another way of looking at that same kind of flow is that you have, I didn't realize this was a build. You have your upstream supply chain, where you might be looking to do strategic sourcing and procurement, communicating with your vendors, finding alternate suppliers, that kind of thing. And then there's the operations of the manufacturing business, the actual manufacturing, where you're probably thinking about logistics planning, warehouse management, things like predictive maintenance, and plant manufacturing equipment. We'll talk more about that in just a second, because there's a whole kind of separate data world for some of the things that drive predictive maintenance, but they do intersect a little. We'll talk about that. And then on the downstream, your demand chain, where you're looking to enable things like customer service. You may be building an online catalog for people to buy from, helping drive customer experience with more complete information about them, maybe customized offers, which would kind of lead you into next best set promotions. If you know the demand patterns, you know what people have bought in the past and what they might want to, and you can then attempt to predict what they might want to buy in the future, and give them a custom offer to encourage them to do that, sooner than later or whatsoever. And then demand forecasting. So there's the more you can understand your demand patterns as to who will likely buy what when, then you can smooth out the operations and do a better job of managing your supply chain. So buy side, sell side, inside is what this is sometimes called. But the whole idea of there are many different ways and use cases around the whole set of manufacturing, and a whole lot of different domains. I'll just build this out so you can see. So depending on what part of what use case you're driving for and what part of the demand chain or supply chain you're looking at, you could be trying to find information. You should be building a golden customer master around suppliers if you're trying to do vendor communications or strategic sourcing. The items and materials we buy, whether they're direct or indirect, if you have a good master record of those, you know what you've got in store, you know what you might need to buy. That can inform some of the strategic sourcing conversations. Same with assets. The assets that you're using to do the manufacturing would be the kind of things you're doing the predictive maintenance and condition monitoring on. Reference data is just anything that should be common across everything. So there's kind of a blurry line, I suppose, between something like suppliers and customers, which you would view as genuine master data, or much more simple things that everyone should agree on, like state codes or status codes or things like that. The rather prosaic stuff, but if you have it inconsistent across all your systems, by the time you try and bring the data together and use it in a consistent way, it becomes tremendously hard. So as simple as it is, it can be tremendously powerful to get that right up front. You know, as we talked about earlier, build it in the MDM solution, then have everybody else subscribe to that, so that you just don't end up with all of that variance. And then other things like facilities and locations, you know, for delivery, for shipment, let's standardize some of that stuff so that we don't have to maintain it in multiple different places. Products, which could be, you know, I kind of used item and materials here for what you're buying and products for what you're selling, but, you know, there's potentially some overlap there. And then customers, the people to whom you are selling. All of these are potential domains, and there's many, many more. You can have all kinds of other things, like the AB InBev example, where they have they're managing their ingredient list and their manufacturing process and their formula and whatsoever. So there's all kinds of things that don't fit necessarily neatly into a box that we could predict. And one of the things that we find about MDM in general, Profisee's philosophy in this area, is that you should be able to build as many domains as you want. It shouldn't be focused on a single domain. You may start with a single domain, and Malcolm, you probably have quite a lot to say around this, the idea of how do you roll out and how do you get coverage. But typically you would start with a domain or two that is going to drive a particular tactical use case that gets ROI that everyone really cares about. You obviously want to work on things that people care about. But over time, you will find, after the success of your first project, that there'll be more and more domains that you'll want to cover, so that you can cover more of, in this case, your manufacturing supply chain, or just more parts of your business. A very different example was Domino's Pizza bought Profisee in order to do some kind of prediction of what people might want to buy during the ordering process. So you were using AI to kind of understand what someone had bought before, and then maybe make them an offer during their as they're entering their offer into their order, I should say, into either into a browser or into an app or whatsoever. And that was very successful. And then a while later, they started using the same MDM software to manage IT assets, you know, your laptops and servers, and couldn't be more different use cases, but the same software can be applied to lots of different things. And picking a solution that can do all of that in any order without any real penalties is pretty important. Not all MDM solutions do that. And maybe, Malcolm, you can speak a little bit to that and how it applies in manufacturing also.
Yeah, I mean, the historical knock on MDM is that it takes forever and it's really disruptive, right? And that it's really expensive. And if you were to try to do everything on this slide, those things would probably be true, right? If you were to do everything all at once and take this kind of galactic Big Bang approach, it could be really disruptive, and it could take a long time, and it could be really, really expensive. Now, Martin, kind of the question that you asked was hinting about kind of implementation and how do you get this up and running, and how do you get value out of MDM? Well, when I was at Gartner, what I would recommend almost always was, well, not almost always, always was to try to limit your scope, be as agile as you possibly can, right? Carve things into little bite-sized chunks, take an MVP approach to MDM, right? What I would hear from my manufacturing clients was, hey, we've hired a consultant. We're going to consolidate 15 SAP instances, and our roadmap for that is 3.5 years, 4 years, right? Where the business is going to have to wait 3 years to understand any sort of supplier risk or any diversity risk, or understanding what our finished products really, really look like, or to have a consolidated view of our finished products. And the business doesn't have 3 years to wait anymore, right? We live in a world of constant change. And who would have guessed 3 years ago what we were about to go through over the last 2, right? So we live in a world of constant change. Can you instead take a little bit more of an MVP approach, carve things into small bite-sized chunks? What I would recommend is, one, if you were just starting out on MDM, right? If you're just starting out on MDM, is to try to solve for some analytical use case where you can drive value by solving for a 360 of something, a 360 of a supplier, a material, location, an asset, any of the things listed on the bottom of this slide, right? Where simply having that visibility could be valuable, where even knowing how much business you're doing with a single supplier could allow you to go and start renegotiating some of the terms with that supplier. You don't need to consolidate ERP platforms in order to renegotiate a contract term, right? You just need to know when you should be able to do that, and where you've got different prices for the same good for the same supplier. So can you start with more of an analytical view? That's kind of step one. Step two, I would kind of challenge the notion of being tied to a domain. Instead, what I would recommend is to be tied to a business process. Yes. Because you can quantify that, and that's how the business runs. It runs on processes. It doesn't run on domains per se. Example I gave before earlier was onboarding a supplier, right? Maybe can you speed that up, or can you lower the risk with your supplier onboarding, or maybe you're doing some sort of recertification on an annual basis, or every 6 months you're recertifying your suppliers, and it's a really, really manual task. But that's an example of taking a process-centric approach and using MDM to speed up those processes or to reduce the costs associated with those processes, instead of just focusing necessarily on a domain. Easier to carve things into smaller chunks, right? Easier to take more of that analytical approach. Those are two things that I would absolutely focus on. Is keep it lean, keep it small, focus on analytics first, then get into more operational styles of MDM where you're really focused on optimizing business processes.
Yep, I completely agree with that. When you said process, I would, in my head, I was thinking process or use case.
Yes.
If you're thinking about the outcome, we want to reduce our cost of blah, 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 then you apply, you figure out which processes, which domains are involved, and you build the scope depending on the outcome, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to master my customers and then see what happens.
Yeah, well, I would ask my clients, well, how do you know when you're done? Right? Yeah. How will you know when you've succeeded? I would always ask, what's your scope? And they would say the supplier domain. And then I would say, okay, well, how do you know when you're done? How will you know when you've succeeded? And the answer was, well, we'll have a single ERP. Well, again, very few people are going to be compensated, other than IT leaders, are going to be compensated on a single ERP instance. Your business leaders are going to be compensated on driving down your supplier costs, or increasing your productivity, or any other sort of key business KPIs that the people are typically incented on. So focus on those and you'll be far more likely to succeed.
Yeah. A good friend of ours always said you should be able to describe your objectives for MDM without using the word data.
That's a good one.
If you focus too much on data, then you're just at the wrong level. You need to be able to describe your objectives without using that word, and then you're probably at the right level.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. So there's an extension of this. This is the world that we tend to play in, but for clarity and disambiguation, there is a whole nother parallel data world here. And maybe Malcolm, I didn't realize I was going to build out. Maybe you can speak to this, that the world of operations and shop floor data capture and the unified namespace strategy. Not that we necessarily do this, but I think it's an interesting parallel with the MDM world.
Well, it is, and I'm hearing more and more of this through some of my peer networks and through some of the conversations that I'm engaged in on LinkedIn and some of the industry conferences that I'm going to. I'm hearing more and more of this world of kind of IT, OT convergence. And the way that I tend to look at things is through data, right? And there are certain domains of data that would traverse both of these worlds. The best one here is supplier, right? Can you drive down your supplier terms, or can you optimize your supplier relationships by having a more robust, complete view of your relationship with a supplier, both from an indirect or a direct perspective? Would it benefit your organization to know if one of your suppliers that is selling you, one of your vendors, I should say more correctly from an indirect perspective, if one of your vendors was selling you a robot arm or something else that was working on your operations floor, or keeping your plants running, would it benefit you to know if the company that sold you that robot arm was also a customer sitting in an ERP system, right? Could you optimize your relationship with that corporate entity if you had full depth of knowledge that they were both a vendor to you and a customer to you? We call this balance of trade. Would that insight help you optimize your relationship? I think the answer to that question is yes. So this isn't necessarily about a systems consolidation, because often the systems that are running these two worlds, the IT world and the OT world, are very, very different. And yes, we can talk about cost savings that may accrue by having, some systems level consolidation. But really, I think the great starting point here is to look at data and understand where key data may be traversing both of these worlds. Where again, can you start from a more of an analytical view, look across these worlds and say, hey, lo and behold, we've got suppliers or we've got materials that are traversing both of these worlds. One of the spare parts that is used for this machine maybe is also part of our direct sourcing, right? I mean, maybe that's more of an extreme example, but could you look at the underlying data here and try to understand where there could be some significant opportunities to optimize relationships with suppliers, or optimize how you manage parts, or optimize your indirect spends by linking everything from more of a data perspective instead of a systems perspective? And I think there's interesting things that can be seen here.
Yeah, and to be clear, that the idea of a unified namespace is around things like monitoring the robot arm that Malcolm talked about on the shop floor with IoT, with Internet of Things, and getting streaming sensor readings coming in. So you've got massive amounts of data, all of which are around predictive maintenance or condition monitoring of that equipment to predict when it may fail. And the intersection in that case with MDM could be, well, we think this thing is it's starting to vibrate a lot. It may fail. We need to bring the line down and do some maintenance on it. But let's not schedule that unless we know we have the spare parts available to actually do the maintenance. And so that's where some of the IT information intersects with the operational information on the shop floor. And all these dots on here would be use cases or data types that are very, IoT space specific. These kind of gray ones, the green ones being just the IT, information about the supplier of the robot arm, of the availability of the parts kit for that robot arm for this type of maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. And then in between are some of the things Malcolm talked about where there may be an intersection. So it's something that we were doing some research into recently, and we're kind of stunned by the parallels really of how data is being used to drive the business, but different types of data in different ways with different technologies, but with some intersection. So it's interesting, I think, and useful to think about in terms of just disambiguating what we mean when we talk about digital transformation. Because you could argue that the IoT stuff is equally digital transformation from anything we're doing in the IT world.
Yeah, I've seen a few folks kind of highlight Tesla as the one company that has kind of figured this out, and where they don't necessarily draw a distinction between IT and OT, and that data can flow freely across all of these worlds, and that kind of IT-centric data is used deeply from an OT perspective to understand demand patterns and understand customer needs, and where kind of in real time, manufacturing is responding in real time from an OT perspective to what's happening in more of an IT world. And it seems like there are some use cases out there and some examples out there where companies have figured this out. And the story around Tesla is that it's a data company that just happens to make cars, right? And I think this is a great example of that.
Just like Domino's is a data company that just happens to make and deliver pizzas.
There you go.
And the more you invest in the infrastructure to think about it that way, the more innovative and nimble you can be, which I think is kind of the overriding lesson for all of this. Okay, final topic. So this is on the downstream side, the customer engagement. A lot of manufacturers tend to sell through, distribution channels, whether it's through retail distribution or warehouses or whatsoever. And so there's a lot of drive. And frankly, this is where we see most of the manufacturing use cases amongst the customers that we serve, manufacturing customers we serve, is understanding their ultimate customer in order that they can think about how to drive cross-sell, upsell with custom offers, give them the option of going direct to the consumer, either to cut out the middleman, and which can improve your margins, or to get better faster demand signals, so that you can better manage what the supply chain ought to be. Better manage what you're buying, and building in order to sell. So, and the chart on the left here is really just showing the idea that we've already talked about, that data about a single company or customer can come from multiple places. It tends to be fragmented in the business, coming from the ERP system, the CRM system, supply chain management systems, and then perhaps there's other information in some kind of BI or data warehousing system. And assembling all of this together using MDM is kind of the key to knowing everything that's going on with the customer, what often is called customer 360. But then intersecting that with products and who's bought what products and when and where and how, and characterizing what's been done and what people might want to do in the future is kind of the key to all of these things. So maybe, Malcolm, you can talk a little bit about or dig farther into how some of these things are accomplished and some of the technologies involved, like AI and all of that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question, but just kind of going back to what I saw over the last couple of years, particularly coming out of COVID, was a lot of, we'll just call them mid-sized manufacturers, right? Who were 300 million-ish to maybe 2 to 3 to 4 billion in sales, that were B2B2C, as so many manufacturers are, right? Which is they're making widgets, they're making HVAC equipment, they're making fishing rods, it doesn't matter. And that they're highly, highly dependent on these downstream participants to make sure that their goods get to end consumers. And what I saw at Gartner over and over and over again was I would get these calls, we called them inquiries, where people from these companies would call up and say, hey, listen, we've been given a mandate to go more direct to consumer, right? And to kind of tie everything together. We want this kind of holistic, all the way from the bill of materials, all the way to, you know, finished product, to the marketed product. We want visibility across all of that. And yes, we increasingly want to start to sell directly to customers. Kind of the classic use case here that has been in the news recently is Nike, where they have gone from about 10% direct to consumer to over 50% direct to consumer. Like that is a digital transformation, where as a manufacturing company, what would you do? What would you need in order to do this, right? Well, you would need what we're looking at on the screen, right? You would need to start understanding who are your customers. And often what I saw as kind of a baby step, a first step here for a lot of these manufacturing companies was, yes, we want to have our own e-commerce channel. We need to go hire a separate team to do that. This is a completely different world and a completely different operating model, and we'll get there. But for now, can we find ways to better understand our customers, right? Can we find ways to, whether it's through a warranty program or some other program, to gather this data and to create a single view of who our end customers really are here? A lot of that ended up with manufacturers kind of really wrestling with bad data that they're getting from point of sale systems and other systems where they are dependent on these wholesalers or distributors and providing data back to the manufacturer, but the manufacturers having to try to kind of make sense of all of that data, whether it's point of sale data or any other data coming from these intermediaries, but where they're capturing that and trying to run processes that look like what we're looking at on the screen, right? And when you're talking about consumers, it's Jeff Smith, Jeffrey Smith, Jay Smith, one thing or three things, right? Maybe some commonalities around address, maybe some other commonalities in the data as you see on the example here. But this is the quintessential MDM use case, right? When how do I create a single view of that customer and the depth of their relationship with us? Maybe they're buying multiple products from us. I'm getting data from all sorts of different places. I'm getting it from CRM, I'm getting it from MDM, or I'm getting it from ERP, I'm getting it from digital marketing systems, and getting it from third parties. I give the example of point of sale data, which is often a mess. How do I find a way to kind of put my arms around all of that to develop some sort of a single view of our relationships with our customers? This is what, this is where MDM lives and breathes, right? This is what we do for a living from an MDM perspective, to try to make some sense of all of that. And yes, there's a bit of integration here. Yes, there's a little bit of data quality rules. Yes, some governance policies kind of have to be defined about, like, how do I define a customer and a few other things. But we would argue that this could be a weeks-long enterprise and not a years-long enterprise if you do things the right way and if you follow some best practices that we can most certainly discuss in more detail offline.
100%. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Malcolm. So we have a little less, and we have about 7 minutes left. If you have any questions on any topic, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will, I think we'll have time to get to them. Just as we draw towards a close, if you do have any questions about anything, any topic, product functionality or manufacturing use cases or whatsoever, you can go to our homepage and go to contact and get in touch with either a salesperson or a technical person and chat with them. Or we do weekly demos. I specifically do weekly demos with live software to talk about what Profisee does in general, what our product does in general, I should say, and also in alternate weeks, how we're integrated in the Microsoft environment with Purview. So I'd invite anyone to come to those. You can come to one of those regular webcasts, or you can request a custom demo depending on what it is you're interested in. So that would be how to continue the conversation if you want to do that. Yes, Malcolm.
Yeah, and my standard call to action is reach out to me on LinkedIn. Search Hawker, Hawker, Malcolm. There's only three of me. There's only three Malcolm Hawkers on the planet. So hopefully you find the right
only
one.
Three in social media, you should say, right? You don't.
Well,
know.
Okay, that I'm aware of. There may be more of me out there, but there's only three that I'm aware of. So please connect on LinkedIn. As Martin said, we do demos all the time. If you've got any questions, please throw them in the chat. You know, I'll ask myself a question, and I'll put on my Gartner hat, and I'll say, well, Malcolm, we have SAP. Why would we need this? And I heard that a lot when I was at Gartner. And SAP does a lot of things very, very well. In terms of ERP systems, they are a world-class ERP system that are used by some of the biggest manufacturers on the planet. Hard stop, right? And SAP is not going to be replaced, and it does some things incredibly, incredibly well. SAP has an MDM solution. It's kind of not SAP's core bread and butter. It is our core bread and butter. But what I have seen many, many, many times, whether it's Profisee or other non-SAP solutions, obviously I'm kind of a fan of Profisee because it helps pay my mortgage. But where companies that embark on MDM, increasingly, going back to what I said before, the business doesn't have 3 years to wait for your ERP consolidation. It just doesn't. It wants insights faster than that. And what I inevitably saw when I was at Gartner is these large SAP initiatives, whether it's an ERP consolidation, whether it's even a data cleanup or anything touching SAP, starts to get very, very expensive and starts to get very, very, very time consuming. Can you instead partner with a company like Profisee, stand something up right next to SAP where you could be driving value for the organization, again, in weeks and not years? Would your organization see something valuable in having a single view of your suppliers across every single manufacturing plant? Would it be valuable to have that insight, again, in weeks and not years? So there are most certainly some valid use cases here. We're implementing an MDM solution that sat right next to SAP as a means to accelerate some of these data management processes and accelerate some of these insights. I think a lot of companies, the answer here is yes, absolutely, there is value there. We're not going to replace SAP as an ERP system. It's not going to happen. But are there alternatives here that are easier to use, that are faster time to value? The answer is most certainly yes. And implementing those, like a Profisee, does not mean that you are sacrificing any of the goodness that you're getting from a supply chain management, a procurement perspective, a manufacturing perspective from SAP.
Yeah, that's exactly the question I was going to ask you, Malcolm. And it's something we see a lot in our customer base. The idea that you can get enterprise metrics while you're swapping out your ERP systems, particularly SAP, and moving to the cloud. You can sort out the data so that when you consolidate the systems and re-implement them, so to speak, you've got the right data, and that you can run those things in parallel and sync back and forth between them. It's a pretty powerful set of tools, I believe. Yeah,
I mean, what you basically just said, I'm paraphrasing you, is that you could use a solution like a Profisee as a bridge.
Yes.
Right. If you were going to embark on an ERP consolidation, first thing I would question: is this really the right thing to do, and do you have a really solid business case here? And if the answer is yes, and you're committed to the ERP consolidation, okay. If you were going to do that, though, what you would do in terms of your roadmap to get from where you are to where you want to be is you would create an MDM. You'd call it a sandbox, but you would drag data from all of your various ERPs. You'd put it into one place. You'd apply some consistent data quality rules to it. You'd apply some consistent governance rules to it. You may even do a data cleanup, separate conversation. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got perspectives on whether the data cleanup will lead value or not. Separate issue. But what you would end up doing to solve for an ERP consolidation would be to build a freestanding MDM. Right? Well, if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you be doing it with a world-class solution like a Profisee that can help you accelerate that instead of kind of just doing it in a one-off thing? So what you end up doing is it ends up looking an awful lot like MDM, but again, do you have 3 years to wait for value from that?
Yep. Perfect. All right, we have 1 minute till possibly the webcast is going to close on us. So let's wrap it up here.
Probably will.
I think we answered any questions that were in the chat or Q&A.
We did.
And I'll just remind you, we have live software demos every Wednesday. There's a manufacturing ebook that is kind of parallels some of the conversation we had here that you can grab from the Profisee website under the featured resources tab. And Malcolm, why don't you pitch us CDO Matters as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I have a podcast. There's a video version out on YouTube, and it's through all of the major podcast providers: Spotify, Google, Apple. Please check that out if you've got more questions about how to become more data driven. We do cover on some manufacturing related topics, but thanks everybody for carving out an hour of your day to spend with us. I hope we found this insightful, and would love to continue the conversation in any means, any channel possible, as noted on the slide.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.